Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Please participate in our polls by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 85245780. Do share your thoughts with us as we will be discussing the results later during the program. The program will begin shortly. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Please participate in our polls by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 85245780. Do share your thoughts with us as we will be discussing the results later during the program. The program will begin shortly. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Serene Chua, and I'm your host from the Energy Market Authority of Singapore. Thank you once again for joining us at the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Today's webinar, Digitalization, Disruption, and the Grid of the Future, is held in partnership with Clarion Events, organizer of the SIEW partner event, Future of the Grid. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 85245780 to participate in our polls. To pose a question, please use the Q&A feature. Let us know your name and organization, and if your question is directed to a particular speaker. It is my pleasure to now invite Mr. Sunil Kumar Yadav, Head of Energy and Performance Services ASEAN, Siemens, for his presentation. Mr. Sunil, please.
Hi, thank you everyone. Thank you, Sriran. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, evening from wherever you are joining in. Thank you for joining. Hope you all are safe and your loved ones are healthy. Thank you for joining the session. My name is Sunil. I'm Head of Energy and Performance Services at Siemens at Smart Infrastructure. I'm very excited to present and set the stage. There's a pressure on me to set the stage for a very interactive panel discussion on digitalization, disruption, and grid of the future. And I promise to the viewer that we will try to present a real good perspective for our sustainable future. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So let me give you a brief of how this whole transition has happened and how this revolution of energy is going through. First phase is we can say that this revolution is actually into 4 phases, or these 4 phases. First phase itself is energy, which is the real fuel, finding the primary energy. And the second one is about the capacity, which is what we are experiencing now. This is the current phase. Third phase is what we're talking about, the future, flexibility. And the fourth is data, how to make most of the data. So we're going to talk in detail about energy, power, flexibility, and data. Energy, historically, we know that the greatest effort in energy generation was spent on sourcing the fuel. We have sourced it, then extracting the fuel from the deep structures such as coal mines and oil fields, and then subsequently transport back to the point of demand. And that has dominated the cost of energy largely. Due to the excellent storage and property of these fuels, little efforts is required to make this energy available as required to meet the demand, which was historically we were trying to do that. However, the cost is they still hold an significant exploration budget when we actually do this energy. And is it really sustainable, not sustainable? That's another question. Then the next phase of converting this energy into power, where transition of distributed energy sources come in picture, and we try to build capacity. The ability to produce and deploy PVs or wind or on that from a small kilowatt to the megawatt scale has been, we are witnessing that, which is happening across, and that is without the need of any state level finance, because initially the energy was largely from the government. However, when we change energy to power, largely it is without the need of any state level finance. At the same time, the scale up has been and dramatically increasing, and it dramatically reducing the cost of manufacturing and installations. So both wind and solar, actually, we are moving into the capacity phase. Third phase, which is actually interesting, and that will bring a lot of flexibility into future and the sustainability. That's flexibility on matching the supply and demand. So as we know, energy is the only thing which whatever you produce, it get consumed. There's no focus on storage or matching the demand of supply and demand. So largely this is what we have. We talk about flexibility, and this is more and more we're seeing that the cost of integrating renewable into functional, reliable, affordable system is increasing, and it is more challenging for larger share of solar and wind, which is as now increasing the overall portfolio of generation. With that, things are moving from this, and largely the grid power also, we have a challenge also along with that conventionally centralized system have to manage the balance between flexible generation, since it is a large grid, storage, and flexible demand. And I believe now, since it is moving from centralized to decentralized, it is more important to have this matching of supply and demand, so that to avoid any further wastage. And fourth one, which is most important now, it is basically the data. And for the data, I would say that energy is the only industry where everything everything is connected to the network. We have no problem that our system is not connected. Everything which is into the network, it is connected to the power network, but they're not communicating. I believe largely the issue is we have to move from connection to the communication now, and we have to actively engage from entire low voltage, which is largely a passive, to the active part. Loading has to be added so that from sensor to the network to the smart meter, every valuable data we can actually capture. Once we have the data, we can actually plan and upgrade accordingly. We can improve the load prediction in real time, manage supply shortfall, manage minimum service impact and at the same time, we can improve the service experience of the customer. So data will actually bring the right change, and we can make most of our data. And with that, I wish to take to the next slide, where we actually talking about how this whole transition is actually moving in. The future transition of energy system is driven and enabled by fundamental development in science, technology, and society, largely society. And here we have 5 such shift, which is actually making this happen. So I want to take one by one. Decarbonization is largely the topic which everybody is talking about nowadays. We have a last decade left to do something for, and fundamentally focus is on carbon here. Then we have a digitalization, which is largely to bring that power of data. We will talk about later more on this. Then third one is we talk about decentralization, where we actually bring the kilowatt closer or generation closer to the load. What we say generally, I mean, this is a famous one, which say that the best renewable kilowatt is the kilowatt which is you have avoided by energy efficiency. That's the best kilowatt. The second best kilowatt is the kilowatt which you have produced closer to the load. So that's something which decentralized is bringing in. And we also need to decouple this energy services from energy load or use requirement. So we don't have to be whatever get produced and get consumed. We need to ensure that the time should be a different. We should not have I mean, we can produce anytime and we can consume anytime. We have to decouple this. That's important. And the last one is, and I want to focus on this, how can we democratize this whole transition? And when I say democratize, is basically we give the power in the hand of user. And and that's would be the change of the future. And I want to talk about more on this. When you say democratize, is I'll take the example of how we have watched TV from few decades back, when there was a national TV and we have analog channels, and we only need to watch what is coming, rather than if you want to watch music, you cannot, because you have it's a news time. However, after some time, there's a new revolution come and the private channels come in picture, and then they start to it. And recently, thanks to YouTube, once YouTube start coming in, we have a different, and then on top of different platforms, which nowadays it's completely revolutionized. Imagine how things has moved, and then how it has been given this power in the hand of user. So democratization is probably the next phase, which will actually help to transform this. And this is what happening. I'm just giving an example of TV channel, but same with Airbnb or Grab, for example, where we have power has been given to the hands of user. So it's not the I believe the resources are same, the resolution is same, the consumption is same, the generation is same. The only thing is this platform where actually you have given the flexibility and the power in the hands of user is changing. And this is what we are presenting in the next slide. The next slide is all about grid edge. Is that this is the platform we are talking about, where we actually can democratize this. At the same time, all this decarbonization, decentralization, digitalization, these are all are linked to each other. So what actually do this grid edge will do is, so the original definition of grid edge is basically an interface between the grid and the consumer. So it was largely one-way communication last time, but today the meaning has been changed. It's a broader and is reference to many connected technology, and that exists between the demand side and supply side. When I say supply side is largely grid as of now, but now we are moving to the demand side, which is demand side. We have buildings, we have industry, we have consumers, we have residents, we have multiple users. And on supply side, things has moved not only centralized power stations now has moved to decentralized energy has come in between solar plants, wind plants, and a lot of other stuff on the supply side. So we have multiple sources of supply and multiple sources of demand. These technologies include those from local consumption to the production as well as storage of energy. Innovation in both hardware and software is found in the grid edge. So it's a complete simulation. This is the platform where actually you can play around in an adaptive grid and adaptive consumer. And the consumer, and this is what we are next phase is basically when consumer became prosumer, it can have a seamless communication between a grid and the consumer. And that, I mean, let me give you a small example here. For example, buildings which we say the largest, I would say 40% of global CO2 has been generated by buildings, and smart building, if we can, and I want to bring that perspective that smart building alone can do a lot of stuff. At the same time, if we can connect these buildings and we want smart grid, this vision can only be successful when we actually handle the core of it. We handle smart buildings first. We make the existing infrastructure smart infrastructure, and then move to the grid, and we make the grid also smart infrastructure. Both sides, it is adaptive grid and adaptive consumer, which is becoming prosumer now. And this is how we are actually thinking of connecting and presenting this as a new platform where everything is connected. At the same time, they are communicating with each other seamlessly, a peer-to-peer communication. So things has moved from basic electrification to the automation to the digitalization, and now the next phase is basically supply and demand. They're all talking to each other and on the grid edge, same platform. It's a new Airbnb or a new Grab or a new platform for actually having everything in the hands of users. So that's the power of democratization of on the power. And with that, I wish to share that there's a link given for this white paper. So you can download this link and get more information. So in the interest of time, I will hold here and yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. My communication, there's a link available for connecting me directly. So that's also available. Next slides. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil. Log into www.menti.com and enter 8524-5780 to participate in our poll. Let us now look at the result of the first poll question. What is the key challenge faced by utility providers in the region? So do keep your answers coming in. Seems like the leading audience choice for now is integrating diverse energy sources, followed by implementing new digital technologies. May I now have the pleasure to invite Mr. Han Teck Fong, Vice President, SP Power Grid, for his presentation. Mr. Han, please.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, yes, Mr. Han, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, yeah, sure. Just some technical, yeah. So yes, good afternoon and good evening to all, and whichever time zone you are in, and also good afternoon to my fellow speakers and panelists in this session. And I would also like to thank the organizers for having me in this presentation. I'm Teck Fong, and I will be talking about grid digitalization. And I'm from SP Group, and it is a leading utility in the Asia Pacific region that provides sustainable energy sorry, just technical, provide sustainable energy solutions to the region here. So if you can move on to the second slide, please. Yes. So I think many of us are actually grappling with the issue about climate change, global warming, etc., and the ensuing impact that it will bring. In fact, just early this year, we hear of wildfires in the US, Canada, and more recently, floods in Germany, Belgium, and in China. These are actually extraordinary catastrophic events that has not happened before in the longest of time. Yeah. So climate change is the biggest threat to mankind, and combating it requires action and implementation. So in the 2015 Paris Agreement, the guidance is to keep the global temperature rise to no less than 2 degrees and preferably 1.5 degrees C. And to achieve this, countries will have to have their reduction targets, and collectively, I think we will aim to achieve a climate neutral world by the middle of this century. So in Singapore, we envisage that we will peak at about 65 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. And the target is to halve this by 2030, and thereafter to achieve a net zero between 2050 and 2100 as soon as viable. We look to transform industries in Singapore and also economy and society at large in an effort to reduce and mitigate the CO2 emissions throughout. Other mitigations include maybe the adoptions of advanced low carbon technologies, and also to work with internationally, to work with and to collaborate on climate change, and also to tap on regional power grids in it to enhance our supply from renewable energies. While we pursue these initiatives, there are certain key areas and adaptation that we will need to not lose sight of, and these are at the bottom areas here. For example, the coastal protection, the business and network infrastructure protection, our biodiversity, and also to enhance and strengthen the resiliency of our the biodiversity and the greenery in Singapore. And also, we will also look at minimizing the impact of UHI. And perhaps maybe you can move on to the next slide. Okay, in this slide, closer to home, there are some key initiatives, although these are not all of it. There are some that I just want to highlight. These are the key initiatives that we are embarking on to create a greener environment. Among these are in 4 areas, and you can see in the slides. We are exploring to tap on regional power grids for cost-effective energy supplies. On the renewables, solar PV being the most promising, and we are looking at a target of 2 gigawatt peak solar PV penetration to be installed by 2030. As you know, perhaps solar energy also has its own limitations, problems like it requires space for such capture of solar irradiance, and also it is very intermittent in nature, and due to cloud covers occasionally, and is only available during the daytime. So in order to balance this intermittency and to keep the grid stable, we are looking at also ESS deployment that we are targeting to deploy, and this will provide some form of storage of excess energy in the day, and perhaps maybe use it in the night time. Then on the EVs, targeting to have 60 charging points planned for implementation by 2030 to further provide the infrastructure ready for EV adoptions that's coming on stream. We are also trialing out the potential of V2G technologies to study its effectiveness for bidirectional energy flows, including tests of such as frequency controls, load management, voltage control, etc., within our own premises. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So, on our push towards digitalization and modernization of the grid, this is no easy feat, as there are challenges brought about by decarbonization, decentralization, electrification, and digitization as well. For example, the grid, if you looked at it, and also has been talked about by the previous presenter, the grid has actually been designed for one-way flow all this while. And it flows from the supply side, the generation side, to the demand areas. Now, with increasing decentralization of power supply, i.e. the opportunity for consumers and prosumers to generate their own power, complexity arises, and the need to manage bidirectional flows becomes important. Therefore, more sensors and more monitoring and computation and analytics is required to enable this integration. And while we should not forget that all these things that are coming on stream, we should always make sure that the network is reliable and not compromised. We see that the grid will need to adapt itself to these changes, including electrification requirements for EVs, and more data, more computation will be needed in order to enable digitization of the grid, including communication as well. Digitalization, while it seems to be a solution to these challenges, in itself is also poses cybersecurity risks as a lot more systems are interconnected, and hence we are guided by the regulatory environment to make sure that we comply to these standards of cybersecurity. Now, leveraging on industries 4.0 initiatives as well, including the artificial intelligence and machine learning, will also help push the digitalization agenda. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, slightly granular in the initiatives, although these are just a glimpse of all the initiatives that we are planning to do. There are two key prong areas that we want to look at, two approaches. One is to look at predicting the future of the grid. Future, what I meant is that forecasting and prediction the network behavior in real time. By this, we mean to be predictive in the way we manage the grid, and being data driven is also a given, and I think it is it's a no regret move, and to ensure data conforms to a certain common standard, common information standard, such that it will be interoperable and interchangeably between systems. And we will also with all this sensing and with comms and with AI, I think accurate data is needed for real-time computations and real-time analysis. And also with complete data, we could also build digital twin of the assets and all the network for us to enhance on our planning, network planning, and also the operations of the grid. For example, AI and machine learning adoption will help us in better planning of the maintenance instead of relying on traditional time-based sort of maintenance. Better forecasting of network constraint will also be a direct outcome of AI and machine learning implementation. And the second prong that we are talking about is about providing intelligent control and management to the grid. Edge control is one of the things that we would like to also look at, and this probably will be residing in the substation level or at the places where the distributed energies are prevailing, and this will help us to sort of better control the local environment of the grid, and without losing the overall system level centralized orchestration of the control of the grid. And ADMS, I think this is the key to the providing active network management to the grid, and also to facilitate the DERS management, as in distributed energy resources management, that's going to come on stream big time. Yeah. And digital substations, as more and more of such digitization happens, and a lot of suppliers and OEMs are providing IEDs and digital relays for substations that's coming on stream. And this will help us in the future to have more data from the substations, and also in terms of digital relay, we will be able to manage and control or set configurations of protection settings in the future. And with AR and virtual reality and computer vision, I think this will help operations and maintenance on the fly. For example, field crews that are at the site, they will be able to call upon something that they needed to check, but instead of having to travel back or call somebody, they can call upon all the database that's already available on their AR and VR facilities and devices that they are having at their sites. And also with this AR and VR, we are able to backplay and perhaps maybe to simulate some of the issues that's happening in the grid for training purposes. Yeah. So while we are embarking on all this a glimpse of digitization, grid digitalization, our key focus remains that we will have to ensure the safety and reliability of the network, and to uphold our position as one of the most reliable grid in the world. And the second thing is about facilitating the DERS integration, and thirdly, to ensure that we have operational excellence across. And lastly, we should not forget our crew and engineers and the competency level, the expertise levels that we need to train in order for them to be working in tandem with the technological growth that is coming, that's hitting the grid. Yeah. If you can move on to the next slide, please. Now, so how do you envisage the future of the grid? How do we see the future of the grid? I think, in my opinion, it will be a constantly evolving one, and taking advantage of digitization and technological advancement that's coming along the way. And it will always be work in progress. And we envisage that the future of the grid will be digital and will be more instrumental, more connected, and more intelligent. And with the ultimate goal of bringing out a more reliable and sustainable future for all. I think with this, I thank you all. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Mr. Han. If you have not voted, log in to www.menti.com and enter 85245780 to participate. Let us now look at the result of the second poll question. What is the biggest impact digitalization would have on the future of the grid? It seems like we have quite a close match between driving cost efficiency and competitiveness in the market, as well as supporting the integration of favorable renewable energy. So with that, I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Surat Tantadit, Chief Enterprise Architect, Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand, for his presentation. Dr. Surat, please.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Surat Tantadit, Chief Enterprise Architecture of EGAT. I'm so pleased to be here and would like to share my experience and my vision about the digitalization and grid in the future. Next slide, please. I will touch the disruption. I think the previous two speakers have already mentioned about the digitalization, decentralization, electrifications, as well as democratization. But in my point of view, I would like to specific in terms of the impact to the utility. As shown in this slide, for the decentralization, the happen in the next future should be the community power plant or small power plant come with the solar rooftop and microgrid. Okay, and then for the electrifications, I think most of the country are looking for the EV, and the EV charging station is the new business. Meanwhile, for the digital technology or digitalization, we need a platform, like a digital platform, to communicate direct with the EV charging station, try to find what is the next station in next 50 kilometers, and use the digital technology to select the energy that we need. For example, we need the green resource energy. We can select the new resource, and we use the digital technology to control the microgrid. Then most of the technology in digitalization a lot and based on the sensor network. Okay, next slide, please. If we take a look back around 15 years ago, NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology from US, has been proposed a smart grid model. I think it's very well and still applicable to demonstrate what going to be changed in the next future. Starting in the left, you see that we have 7 domains of the smart grid, starting from the bulk generation, transmission, distribution, and network operator is the middle. And in the top of this picture, we have the customer, we have the market, and we have the service provider. Obviously, today you see that we have the new player. The new players come at the customer. They will change the customer to be prosumer because the solar rooftop is very cheap. And then the customer can be a prosumer, can send the electricity back into the grid. Meanwhile, some country has already deregulate the market. Then the model has been changed, but in Thailand, we still the single buyer. But in the future, we should have the market for the energy trading. And the service provider, this domain will have the significant impact in the change because they will have the virtual power plant and load aggregator to be a new player in the service provider, as well as the teller retail market. Okay, they will have the retail market to got the electricity from the operator and send down to the customer directly. For the bulk generation in the bottom, for the decentralization, the bulk generation will be smaller and change to be a very small power plant or small power plant and connect to the grid, not at the transmission level, but in the distribution level. How we govern this situation? The utility need to have the capability as shown in this slide. The communication is important because in the future, they will have many data sent from the domain and communicate between each domain. Okay, the second is to think about the security and data analytics, as well as the grid controller or the system controller should become the major capability of the future. Next slide, please. Then I summarize the capability of the utility as shown in this picture. You see that the capability of the utility has been changed. In the past, we don't think about the renewable indication, but it is a main capability that the utility need to think about. And the security is still the same, okay? And green energy should be another capability. And data analytics and the monitoring control. And very important thing is think about the customer experience. Then the utility are looking for the digital platform that can interwork directly with the customer, try to engage the customer to leverage the customer perception and give the confidential to use the electricity with high availability. Okay, next slide, please. After I said about the capability in the future and how we transform the utility, this picture is the model that I think for EGAT, we would like to be the leader in the next generation utility. Then we think at least 5 to 6 domains that we need to touch it. Okay, as shown in this slide. The first domain is the innovation and new business. Because in my previous slide, you see that we have many things that does not happen before. For example, the trading market and the renewable integrations should be the innovation of EGAT, and we would like to leverage this innovation to be our new business. Then the goal is try to change our core competency to be more in not only in generation and transmission, but down into the distribution and retail market. And the second domain is the stakeholder engagement. Okay, in the past, EGAT is a generation and transmission. Then we have only few customers. because we don't sell directly direct to the customer. But in case of we can go into the retail market, we need to think much more about the stakeholder. Then we would like to use the digital platform to leverage the customer experience that can have from EGAT service. And another third domain is the smart operation with the digital process. In the smart operation with the digital process, it means that we will use the digitalization or digital equipment into the operation, not only the generation, but include the transmission. Then the goal is the performance improvement. Okay, and the fourth domain is the culture and organization. Okay, we would like to leverage the culture of EGAT to be more digital, and then we would like to enhance the people to change their culture and change the brand of the organization to be a trust and prime for the Thailand country. And another two domain is the data domain and digital competency. For data domain, we would like to change the data to be the new asset. Then we think a lot about how we change the data, how we govern the data, and how we change the data from the general data to be the new asset with the advanced analytics. And meanwhile, for the digital competency, it's very important because in case of we change only the technology, we don't think about the human resource that we will have problem in the future. Then we try to do like a competency skill and try to educate our staff that can support the technology in the future. Okay, next slide, please. After I mentioned the strategic roadmap, okay, here's the digital space that can be happen in the future. You see that in the top of this picture, it is a value chain or value streaming starting from the generation, market operation, transmission, distribution to the digital meter or smart meter. And after smart meter, it's go to the residential and industry. If we put the digital into this area, you see that we have many digital technology that can apply, starting from asset lifecycle management. Okay, we would like to use the digital to change the way that we do the maintenance to be predictive maintenance, or we call the asset performance management. Okay, for the grid level, we use the grid integration and activation, okay, to support the new coming of the renewable integration and optimize the power and balancing between demand and supply sides. Meanwhile, for the market or the operations, okay, we will introduce like a blockchain technology to test the feasibility of the peer-to-peer trading. Okay, it's a digital space, but it is impossible that we can implement in parallel because it's a lot of initiative for the digital. What is the strategy? Next slide, please. From my experience, the strategy that we can use has a 4 steps. The first step is think big. We need to think globally. And the second step is to start small. For the think big, okay, I recommend you to use the composable enterprise architecture to demonstrate, starting from the business architecture, data architecture, application, until the technology architecture, to present what is the current situation and what's going to be in the future. Okay, it's a think big. And after we find out the concept of the composable enterprise architecture, we can prioritize what is a high priority project. Okay, but with the high priority, you should start small or proof of value first. After we can prove the value of this initiative, we can do another thing is move fast, okay, or build fast. Try to show the result within 6 or 7 months for that initiative. And finally, it's very important, scale to value. Try to scale your initiative from the digital technology to show that you got the value from the digitalization. Okay, that is my experience and my vision would like to share in this panelist. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Surat. Do take a minute to visit www.menti.com and enter 85245780 to participate in our poll. Let us now look at the result of the third poll question. What would help accelerate the future of the grid in the region? So most of our respondents have chosen enabling policies and regulatory frameworks to advance a more sustainable electricity grid. So without further ado, let us welcome Mr. Rama Ganguly, Principal Engineer, Australian Energy Market Operator, for his presentation. Mr. Rama, please.
Thanks, Irene, and thanks for the opportunity to present at this webinar today. I hope everyone is keeping safe and well. It's been a really interesting discussion so far. My presentation now brings a slightly different perspective, that of a bulk power system operator. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a brief introduction about AEMO first. We are the independent system operator for the two major synchronous power systems in Australia and their associated wholesale markets. These are the wholesale electricity market in the west, the southwest of the country, serving about 1 million customers with a total system size about 5.5 gigawatts, and the NEM, the National Electricity Market, on the east coast, which is one of the biggest, by geographic size at least, one of the biggest interconnected power systems in the world, serving around 10 million customers with about 60 gigawatt centralized 60 gigawatts of centralized generation. What this slide doesn't show is that Australia is at world-leading levels of decentralization today, primarily driven by the uptake of residential rooftop solar generation, with almost 14 gigawatts of installed capacity across 2 million customers, equating to about 1 in 4 homes. Next slide, please. So this slide is just trying to give a sense of our experience with the energy transition here. The chart on the right shows the change in our generation mix since 2010 and projected forward for one of our scenarios out 20 years. Like I imagine, most power systems around the world are also undergoing, we're experiencing several transitions at once. The first one being from a mostly synchronous system to an inverter-based one, and this has distinct implications for how system stability is managed, primarily because we need to provide for the system stability services that that synchronous generation used to provide for free as a byproduct of their operation in the energy market. Inverters are definitely very capable, sophisticated devices, and that can be configured very specific ways. And the key challenge is specifying their performance in grid codes and technically specifying the services they could provide. From a centralized to an increasingly decentralized system, that's the next one that we're experiencing, as touched on before, through the uptake of distributed resources behind the meter and embedded within the distribution network. And as these resources become an increasingly large share of the generation mix, they'll need to be more actively integrated within the broader power system. And as previous speakers have touched on, the necessary coordination architectures and across system operators and utilities and consumers and service providers will need to be established for that. And lastly, from a mainly fossil fuel-based system to based on dispatchable thermal generation to one predominantly composed of variable renewables. This means that our balancing challenge is increasingly weather-driven, and as Sunil touched on, flexibility will be paramount. Managing and coordinating from periods with excess renewables generations to deficits and periods in between. Together, these different transitions amount to a future power system that's going to look and operate very differently to the one today. And I think the key point for this audience is that there are going to be significant opportunities from digitalization and grid modernization across all of these different transition areas. Again, as previous speakers have touched on, there's going to be a step change in the amount of data that will need to be captured, and different sensing and monitoring applications, enabling the necessary sort of integration actions to harness and coordinate resources, and operate an increasingly complex system. And I thought the two sort of utility perspectives there, breaking down the key opportunities from a grid perspective, were quite relevant for us as well, and also enabling system flexibility and customers, especially non-traditional actors in the power system, to participate in an increasingly two-way energy system. Onto the next slide, please. Yeah, this slide is just trying to give a bit more of a sense of the criticality of flexibility in the future power system. So on the left here, we have a couple of sort of modelled weeks in 2040 in the national electricity market. So you're spanning sort of different situations with higher renewables and between sort of renewable generation and demand. So you in panel A here, the challenge with higher renewable output, in particular high solar generation, is managing that excess solar generation in the daytime. You move across to low demand and low renewables, where we're having to manage sort of that ramp up into the evening peak, and then sort of still wind conditions in panel C in high demand. Again, sort of managing the intermittency at different times and across different durations, and lastly, sort of that period with high renewable output and high demand, and again, so I think the key point here is that the need for a portfolio of different flexibility options. We're familiar with conventional generation and what that has to offer in terms of peaking and flexible gas and gas plant, and reducing loading levels from synchronous generation today. Increasingly, energy storage is going to be critical, and storage is very versatile in the sense that it can be especially modular, can be sized differently across different parts of the system, and demand response, as well as touched on before, from customers and businesses and buildings, and so on, responding to price signals and other incentives, as well as establishing more interconnection between balancing areas. The other thing I've highlighted here is the opportunities for storage, across different depths, so shallow, medium, deep. So, here we've had storage providing relatively shallow storage starting to provide fast response and sort of capacity-based sort of response, and such as frequency control and fast ramping type services. This is, this could be through aggregated virtual power plant storage, decentralized storage, sort of over sort of a couple of hour timescales. Medium storage is going to be important for intraday energy shifting and driven by demand and solar cycles. We in our planning work, we model this through sort of 4-hour batteries, 6-hour pumped hydro, and 12-hour pumped hydro as well. Deep storage covers those sort of extended wind and solar droughts and seasonal smoothing over seasonal energy smoothing over weeks and months. In our work to date, at the moment, we model this through multi-day sort of pumped hydro, but I think in the future that all of these different depths of storage could be provided by a variety of different technologies, and they'll all have value because given the need is so different and across different timescales. Next slide, please. My last slide touches on the integration of distributed energy resources, and similar to Dr. Surat's digital transformation roadmap and some of the issues he was talking about, we are also here as AEMO trying to collaborate with industry and policymakers here in Australia towards a staged transition to a high DER future. Where so looking at the figure on the right here, we're transitioning from a mostly passive accommodation of approach towards that sequence up. So establishing visibility and understanding of these devices initially, processes in place to manage power system security and reliability, including sort of minimum performance requirements, emergency control capability, and operational tools, which will be required as DER has an increasingly large aggregate impact on the system. And after that, establishing the system architecture and capability to enable active participation, including grid and device level interoperability requirements, and sort of the coordination architecture and system integration between bulk power system operator, the utilities, service providers, and devices, and ultimately sort of the market participation frameworks and price signals necessary for system optimization to enable consumer DER to participate in a way that can be co-optimized with sort of distribution network and system level needs. So as I've highlighted here, sort of digitalization and innovation I think it's quite critical across all of these stages to empower consumers and businesses to be able to actively manage and respond through, via third-party service providers or energy management systems, especially critical for data and information exchange and enabling especially tailored information to enable informed decision making and applications, and lastly, sort of to enable DER to be better integrated within the power system and provide a source of flexibility across the energy supply chain. So yeah, that's it for my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rama. Let us now take a look at the result of our last poll question. In one word, what is your vision for the future of the grid? It seems like we have quite a good number of words here, including efficient, sustainability, greener, smart, digital, cooperative, and quite a number more, which also looks into digitalization and all. So with that, let us now begin the discussion. Please use the Q&A feature to pose your question. Let us know your name and organization, and if your question is directed to a particular speaker. It's my pleasure to now invite Mr. Sunil, Dr. Surat, Mr. Han, and Mr. Rama to join our moderator, Ms. Cara Graham, partner, Power and Utilities, Ernst & Young, for the panel discussion. I'll now hand over to Ms. Graham. Ms. Graham, please.
Thanks very much, Serene, and thank you to our panellists for their presentation this afternoon and for agreeing to take part in our Q&A session. I think it's fascinating hearing presentations from a panellist such as we've had this afternoon, representing a broad range of geographies, and yet many of the issues that we're all grappling with in the energy industry are the same around digitalisation and how we integrate renewables and more distributed energy resources. So we've had a number of questions come through from our participants this afternoon, but I might kick off with one directed to Sunil, if that's okay. And the question is, how can digitalisation help build more flexible and resilient electricity grids?
Thanks, Kara. I believe I was trying to answer some of the questions by the attendees. So let me give a perspective of how digitalization is actually helping. So we all know that in one way or other, we are actually moving towards sustainability targets. And sustainability, when I say sustainability, we might have ESG pressure or investor pressure, but end of the day, people look for opportunity to have technology which pay for itself. And when the technology pay for itself, I believe digitalization, the true example, when technology actually create payback. And this is what actually is happening across the world. Digitalization is actually enabling this whole transition actually. So as during my presentation also I share that, electrical is something where everything is connected, but we are not communicating. A small investment in energy metering or advanced metering probably help the whole generation at the same time, production and consumption together. So this is how I personally feel that once digitalization will be there, we'll have so many data to actually make the most of our grids.
Thanks, Sunil. Rama, you just spoke to us about some of the issues that AEMO is facing as the system and market operator in Australia. I'm wondering if you can help us understand how you are seeing the approach to grid management and system operations change as you're dealing with things like more variable renewable energy and more distributed energy resources.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. So we've undergone quite a I would say quite a tumultuous journey over the last 10 years or so as our generation mix has changed, and as sort of partly as a result of policy enabled entry of large-scale renewables in the power system. And I think some of the key challenges that we've experienced have been around system stability and actually quantifying technically what does the system need, what are those services. And so the key sort of regulatory changes here have been around minimum requirements for essentially the services synchronous generation used to provide. And I think once you get to that level of confidence in sort of system stability outcomes, you can actually really capitalize on the technology, on what the inverters and the variable renewable generation can provide. So having that base level of system security requirements, grid connection requirements for the renewable generators, and then ultimately sort of the coordination and control architecture for distributed resources goes a long way, I think, in terms of enabling that grid, that future, the management of the grid that we'll need in the future.
I think that's really true, isn't it, Rama? Because when we think about the energy industry, and we often think about the sale of electrons and whether that's traded through wholesale markets or bilaterally, but I think until recently we hadn't really thought about all of the ancillary services that sit around those markets. And as we're seeing the energy systems transition, I think the focus is also shifting to the ancillary services and the things that we need to keep the grid stable, not just the markets through which we can buy and sell electricity.
That's right, 100%. Yeah, it's a lot more than just energy. And the inverters are very capable and can provide these services, especially ones enabled by digitalization that we're talking about today.
Okay. Tech Fong, maybe the next question is one for you as one of the utilities represented on this afternoon's panel. So the question is, what are some of the key challenges utilities are facing from the energy transition?
Yep, thanks for the question. Yeah, so with decentralization of energy and the opportunities for consumers themselves to participate in providing energy to the grid, I think the important thing is how to ensure that we are able to interface such DERs in the future. Number one. Number two is about how do we ensure that we have adequate capacity to support such integration both ways, because the power will now be flowing bidirectionally. And thirdly, it's about how do we control and have a view of whole complete visibility of the entire network in terms of stability and voltage control, because as you have got more distributed energy at the downstream distribution level, you would expect that the voltage will rise quite tremendously, and there will be a need for us to look at how to mitigate such rise and also to look at how we can increase the level of energy storage, so that in times that we require this energy, we are able to discharge it at the times when it is required. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Surat, I might put this one your way, given that it is also about utilities, and it says, what opportunities for utilities can be unlocked through digital initiatives?
What the opportunity for the utility? Okay, that's great, good question. I think the utility will change they run their business. The same as the previous speaker, they mentioned about the change in the television broadcasting. I think the same. For the utility, they will do more business, like a service provider, like an ancillary service, to be extra service to the customer. And for utility, I think they will have another opportunity like do a storage service to the customer. Then the way that they do the business is step down into the beyond electron as my slides or behind the meter. Okay, that's still open for the utility to run their new business. Okay.
So there's a question here in relation to energy storage, and it says, what role can energy storage systems play to mitigate grid intermittency efficiently and cost effectively? Rama, I might pass that one your way for some initial comments, but certainly if any of the other panelists have a comment, feel free to chip in, because I know energy storage is certainly a topic that's very front of mind.
Yeah, I as I touched on in one of my slides there, that I think the opportunities for storage are vast in the future power system, and it's both in terms of storage depth, shallow to deep storage, and also in terms of modularity and topology. Behind the customer meter, embedded within the distribution LV, right up to sort of grid scale batteries that that we've started to see here in Australia as well. And storage has been pretty quite quickly here in a short amount of time demonstrated its value, especially in terms of fast responding ancillary services. And so I think the really capitalizing on the opportunities will come down to things like standards, technically specifying the services storage can provide, and especially sort of establishing those participation pathways and establishing, so that customers, utilities, and so on think this makes sense for us to invest in because it can offer the benefits that I think Sunil put it before, that they pay off themselves, right? So
true. I can add something on this, Rama. So first of all, this may not be suitable for every market currently. Sooner or later it will be. When we sell this storage system in India, that's a different perspective, or Indonesia, where we have power cuts and such issues. Singapore need energy storage? That's a topic which we probably want to understand. And I believe, yes, we need that, because energy is something which more you produce, more it get consumed. The storage, the question of storage is not there. And especially in buildings or industries, I especially urge that, we have a lot of space which we probably utilizing for solar, rooftop solar, for example. And the last week, we have 60 megawatt of floating solar has come in place. But is that not enough? We need more. And then more is also not enough. We need to ensure that we have a right storage to utilize that. So solar alone may not bring that value if we add solar with storage plus microgrid controller, so that it can actually do the more of value addition to the overall installation, overall investment. So I strongly urge that if every building became self-resilient, self-sufficient with its own energy produce and store, and it can also do, that's what we see in the future, actually probably do a peer-to-peer load shading through the utilization of energy storage with the microgrid controller, and creating a virtual power plant across the grid. And that will stabilize the whole grid in future.
Excellent. Thanks, Sunil. So there's a question here which I think is an excellent one, because it's about customers. And I think at the heart of everything that utilities and we as an industry do are customers. So the question is, how are customer expectations changing as the result of the grid becoming more decentralized and digitized? So I'll open that up to the panel generally. Sunil, I think you had the floor, so happy for you to kick off, but I'm also interested in others' views around how customer expectations are changing.
Okay, so I'll share start with largely when we say customer, is it either industries or buildings? And I'll take a perspective of residents also, because now we're all working from home, load has been shifted from office to home now. So that is also increasing. So we need to be part of it. But I'll take largely industries and buildings as an customer perspective. Buildings largely we have 40%. They're responsible 40% of CO2, and we need to understand, and it is responsibility of utilities company to also enable these consumer to be more energy efficient. The first thing what we actually practice and preach, we call it total energy management, where we ask our customer to reduce, produce, and procure together. So when we say reduce, produce, and procure together with the digitalization on top of it, we say reduce. Siemens got technologies which can actually help to reduce the end use. So in building especially, we have 60% or average 60% of energy consumption by HVAC. Can we do something for HVAC to reduce? And where we know that 50% of energy can be saved, and there's a responsibility and opportunity available. So Siemens, thanks to Siemens, got technology called demand flow, which actually helped to improve the existing efficiency of chiller plants. And then with everybody, now not only for chiller plant, lighting, escalator, lifts, pumps, anything which consume energy has a solution. And solution is here and now available. Only thing is it might not be evenly distributed across the world, but solutions are available. And that's not only buildings, same with industries, boiler, heater, pumps. We have solutions for everything. We probably need to handle that one first. And once that is handled, the customer perspective is handled, they can actually utilize more of the grid. Grid has a lot to offer. Frankly speaking, we have enough production as of currently, so that we can, and that gives me reminds me a quote of Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "We in this world we have enough for needy, but not for greedy." So we be open for that. We have to create a platform which can enable consume responsibly and produce responsibly in a long run.
Thanks, Sunil. Any other panelists want to put in some comments in relation to changing customer expectations?
Yes, okay, from the customer expectation, I think the customer expectation is not only buy the electron anymore. They would like to buy a service. For example, they need a service that can give them more flexible in terms of the alternative selections of the energy resource. In case of the customer would like to use the green energy, okay, the provider or the energy provider can give to them. Basic requirement of the customer is not anymore. For example, reliability, availability is the basic requirement. But the expectation of the customer is more. As I mentioned, they need a service like a managed energy service, and allow them not only being a buyer, but shall be the seller as well. Is my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Clara, if I may add, the customers, I think the expectation of the future of the grid will be that reliability is utmost, and it will be the responsibility of the grid operator and the entire value chain to provide this continuity of reliability of power supply in the future. And I think if you looked at it, I would look at it as a complete ecosystem, in the sense that we will really need to look at supply and demand, and both parties, whether it's a supply side or demand side, plays a significant role in managing this entire value chain. And I think there's a need for us at the supply end to also influence certain behaviors at the customer end, so that we can actually reap a collective benefit across the entire value chain. I think this is my thought about customer expectation for the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tek Fong. There's a question now in relation to the evolving regulatory framework. So, Rama, I might put this one your way, given that you touched on this in your presentation, and Australia in many respects is at the forefront of how to grapple with some of the issues around integrating more DER. So would you like to make some comments around how you're seeing the regulatory environment evolve as we move through the energy transition?
Yeah, sure. So I think broadly here, since we've come on this journey that sort of started initially as simply accommodating passive devices, almost, to gradually putting in steps to more actively integrate these devices within the broader power system. So, 15 years ago, in the early days of solar PV here, those systems were allowed to connect with pretty minimal performance requirements, and because it was just so early and at that time. And then that moved on to establishing static export limits, for example, and then performance standards. So for distribution network security and safety, so anti-islanding requirements and sort of, voltage support requirements are coming in. The latest, our inverter standard here has just recently been updated to include grid support functions and voltage regulation capability. And then the next step there is the next journey in that evolution towards, higher and higher penetrations is enabling optimization and integration of these devices. So that includes things like interoperability requirements, sort of, and I think as a couple of the utility presenters have touched on, so the future is going to be both actively managing the network as well as actively managing the devices as well. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing in our regulatory frameworks here that the distribution networks are moving towards what they're referring to here as dynamic operating envelopes for PV and PV systems, which is essentially day-ahead scheduling of what the export limits for PV within a particular area will be. So actions like that, grid modernization actions to enable more flexible changes in the voltage profile within the distribution network, and fax devices and those sorts of things. I think there's a greater and greater understanding within our regulatory process so that this is just the start of the process, and more is coming in. It's really a question now of integration and how can we best optimize within the broader system.
Excellent, thanks, Rama. Do any of our other panelists want to make a comment around evolving regulatory frameworks? If not, I'll move on to the next question. Potentially, Tech Phong, this one might be one for you. It says, what are some challenges in rolling out smart grid technologies?
Okay, can I share my idea? Excuse me. What is the challenge that we would like to deploy the smart grid technology? Okay, I would like to step back to my presentation. They have a lot of digital technology or digital space that can apply in the grid. The smart grid technology is trying to use the digital technology, make the grid smarter. The key challenge is we need to figure out the whole picture of our grid. I mentioned the tools that we should use, composable enterprise, try to draw the business architecture, what is a business process and what is the capability, and the data architecture as well as the application architecture. I think the challenge is, firstly, we lack of using the tools that can demonstrate the whole picture of the grid, because they have a lot of domain that we touch. And another thing is the integration. Because when we introduce the technology, most of the technology are from the operation technology. But these operation technology, they are not standalone. They need to integrate back to the IT technology. Then the integration between IT and OT is the second challenge. This is my point of view, Kara.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Surat. And Tech Phong, did you have any comments around either the challenges of rolling out the grid technology or potentially even what are some of those technologies? So when we talk about smart grid technology, what are some examples of the types of technology that utilities are putting on their grids?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is the baggage that we carry. Yeah. So in other words, whatever technology that we already done in the past, yeah, and then we keep on using those technology and refuse to change across the years, that becomes one of the considerations for hindering the growth of an adaptation of new technologies going forward. But I think to each his own. I think each and every utility will have their own challenges given the various stages of economic growth and various stages of adopting technology as it goes along. Yeah. So I think in that light, there's no magic bullet. I think in terms of technology that we can employ, it is all out there, and it's about how we can sieve out what is best suited for whatever that we already have in a network, and how we can integrate with the existing systems that we already have. Because this technology implementation for smart grid is not going to be a big bang kind of thing, because we can never have that kind of opportunity, because most utilities would have already had some form of digitization or technology already in place. So really need to have some calibration on how you introduce new technology as we go along on the grid. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Teck Fong. So Neil, this one might be a good one for you. It says, with greater deployment of digitalisation, artificial intelligence in modern grids, would you foresee a day in the future where the grid can self-learn by itself?
Hope so.
That's a great futuristic question.
Yeah, hope so, and I wish that would be. But direction is there, and I connect to the point my fellow colleagues have made. 2-3 things which is happening. One is basically, I'm bringing the customer perspective again. What is the benefit of customer? Unless we bring that value inside the whole discussion, or why we are doing that, the real purpose. So we have to bring. So first thing is technology is available. What we're talking about, AI and machine learning or self-learning, these are available. The only thing is, do we need to invest in this, or do we have other priorities? So first thing is, we need to bring into the larger perspective that it's not only for the supply side, it is also for the demand side. And I want to bring back this conversation to the sustainability, because if we connect these dots and say that the technology transformation or self-learning grid or all this, what we're going to achieve out of that, we are looking at the future where there would be a net zero. If not all that, we are looking for sustainable world in future. If it is net zero, and that's the purpose of all these technologies, this net zero will not possible only at supply side. We have to integrate to demand. And this is what we are actually trying to bring the gap, that by making a smart self-learning, all these beautiful technologies on the supply side will not help unless we bring demand also in control, or demand. So that's what I say. We have to generate and consume responsibly, both sides. And this responsibility, when I say word responsibility, that can be done through the data. That can be done through a business model, thanks to the data, which actually bring the new business models. And energy as a service. When I love this word energy as a service, because most of the responsibility will pass on to the contractor or supplier or providers. There he uses his innovation to use the best out of it. So I believe, I hope so that things will go on self-learning mode on grid side, but it would be seamless. The real value is when we do it on supply and demand, both sides into a right interface.
Thanks, Sunil. So the next question is a big one. So I'm going to open it to all of the panel members to respond to, and it's in relation to hydrogen and what role you foresee hydrogen playing in the future. Who wants to be brave and start us off?
SP.
I think if you look at the initiatives that are announced by the agencies, hydrogen is one of those things that you're looking at. I think yes, it's early days. I think there are initiatives going around that to how we can sort of take advantage of this clean energy for the future. Yeah. Thank you.
What I can share is that we are in the dire need of a renewable fuel. We need that. For example, if we need to change, so again, go back to I'm doing a lot of consultancy for my customers on decarbonization, And there they have a lot of challenge is like how, okay, we can handle electricity, but how to handle gas, natural gas or fuel. And we don't have, we don't have any renewable source for natural gas or coal or for such services which we are using fuel. I believe hydrogen would be the next change. I foresee that. We as a company, we are also working on that direction, and foresee we are looking forward to have more sustainable electrifications. We no need to put the transform the heat to the electricity. We can actually do the other side. So that's, I foresee that.
Dr. Surat, did you want to make any comments on hydrogen?
Hydrogen, yes. First of all, I would like to know that I'm not the come from the hydrogen generations, but from my knowledge, in Japan, they have a lot of research try to leverage the hydrogen to be one of the renewable energy resource that used in Japan. But for my experience, I do believe that hydrogen is one source that could be in the future. But we need to think a lot about the safety, because hydrogen is a very high impact in case of they have an accident. Okay, that is my point of view. I don't know much about hydrogen, Kara, sorry.
No, that's okay. So there's a follow-up question now around carbon capture and storage. So again, I'll open that up to the panel generally as to whether there are any comments or observations you would make around the use of carbon capture and storage in decarbonising thermal power plants of the future. It's quite specific.
Rama, you want to take?
Yeah, I'll have a go. Yeah, so I think this is one of those areas where if it can be proven and demonstrated and to be achievable sort of within reasonable cost and at scale, and you also have to factor in that, you know, the thermal generation is participating in competitive energy markets, right? So it's, you know, that cost is going to be integrated within their bidding and operations. And I think you know, that's only one part of, you know, speaking in terms of coal initially, of sort of the you know, only one part of integrating sort of, you know, modernized coal, let's call it, within the system. The fact is that coal is still relatively inflexible compared to gas and batteries and other technologies. So I think, but, you know, cross that first bridge of proving their technology first, and then we can have that conversation, I suppose.
We've got probably one final question before I hand back to Serene to wrap up. And the question, and I'll ask it to each of the panelists, the question is, what are the skill sets that you foresee as being needed in your organisations going forward? So if you think about your employees in your respective organisations, are there new skill sets that you see as becoming increasingly valuable? So maybe if we start with Tek Fong, do you want to maybe start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier in my slides, I think digitization and technology surrounding the grid operations and maintenance are moving quite fast. Yeah. So at the same time, I think our traditional engineers are still, you know, heavy current people, and they are sort of exposed to basically cables, switchgears, transformer works, and substation works. I think there's a need for us to upskill this group of people so that they grow in tandem with what the technology will offer as we go along. Yeah. I think this is important, and we will also need people that are technological savvy, so that they will be able to drive on their own passionately in order for them to grow into the system as well, and to adapt to new technologies as it comes along. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tek Fong. Dr. Surat, maybe
Yes.
your observations around future skills needed.
Okay, thank you so much. Back to my presentation, you see that in 6 domains of our digital transformation, we touch in the competency of the digital people. In my point of view, skill is very important for the successful transformation. From my experience, we need to define the future architecture first in terms of the business. What is the business model in the future? And what is the IT architecture in the future? Maybe 3 or 5 years in the next. And after we finalize the picture in the future, we shall elaborate more about the skill that the staff should have. Right now, we have staff that graduate from the computer engineering, but it's not enough because the technology has changed a lot. Then we need to define the competency, starting from the junior until the senior level, like digital science and digital engineering, for example. Okay, that's all for my point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Surat. Sunil, maybe your observations next.
On the skills, I believe largely things are changing, and I mean, we as a company, we are actually service provider in large frame. We have to be, always on one step ahead to ensure that we have the best possibility. So what we are seeing now is the new change is and that can be a skill or can be a attitude. We're looking for people who are more customer centric, in a way that and end of the day, whatever technology we have a pair of hands and eyes behind the scene. Customer centricity is more important. At the same time, yes, followed by all the technology what Dr. Surat has talked about, digital technology, AI, and we're talking about digitalization as top of it. One focus area which we are trying to do is we are actually putting everything on a platform. So we are looking for more, if we can, people can develop that, and that something is applications. So I believe largely in long run we'll have more apps on the hands, and that's what we call power in the hands of user. Things would be more towards mobile and apps.
Thanks, Sunil. Rama, it's always hard to go last, but any additional thoughts from you?
Oh, I can capitalize on all the great answers so far. I think, yeah, as everyone's touched on, I think those traditional power system skills are always going to be important. It's always going to be critical, but thinking of that future system architecture and how that cyber physical system is going to look, the skills like, those digital is such an all-encompassing word, isn't it? So around data applications, developing those services that consumers will actually want to use, that the utilities can actually capitalize on. I think there's going to be a whole range of big data, software, digital integration skills that are going to be really critical.
Thanks, Rama. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour. So at this point, I'd like to thank our panelists, and I will now hand back to Serene to close our session.
Thank you very much to our speakers and moderator for their engaging and insightful session. We have come to the end of the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Do note that a recording of this session will be made available online. We would also love to hear your thoughts on the webinar, so please complete the feedback form that is displayed on your screen. We also look forward to meeting you at SIEW 2021 this October. Registration is now open with an early bird promotion running till 1st October. Please scan the QR code on the screen for more details. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us today, and do participate in our next webinar on renewables in August. Thank you and have a great evening ahead.